Did Keir Starmer just invent a £22 billion black hole out of thin air? 4 months, Labour has pushed this dramatic number to justify tax hikes and brutal cuts, but now the truth is coming out. There's no trace of it in official reports. So why did they lie? In today's video, we'll uncover how Starmer's so-called crisis might be the biggest political bluff in years, and how you're the one paying the price. Stay with us.
Now, I've read that report, as I'm sure others have, and nowhere in that report, nowhere, does it mention £22 billion. It's not there at all.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister knows very well the OBR found no such black hole. And he talks about a budget 3 years ago. The borrowing costs last week are at a 27-year high.
The cloud of corruption over Downing Street has today been replaced by a fog of deceit. Angela Rayner was refusing to reveal exactly what type of donation she took. Then, in the last couple of hours or so, it's emerged that both the Labour Deputy Prime Minister and Chancellor Rachel Reeves declared clothing donations as, quote, office support. Reeves received £7,500 from a donor called Juliet Rosenfeld in 4 instalments from January 2023 to May 2024 that was used to pay for clothing, according to people with knowledge of the gift.
Today, the British Retail Consortium says 2/3 of businesses will have to raise prices to cope with his tax hike. His Chancellor ignored all the warnings and ploughed ahead with an unprecedented borrowing spree, leaving all of us more vulnerable. Now we have businesses saying they will raise prices to cover his jobs tax. We have an energy policy that will drive up bills, and all the while we are spending more day to day on debt interest than we do on schools and universities. The Prime Minister refused to repeat his Chancellor's promise that she wouldn't come back for more. Will he now rule out any new tax rises?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we took the right and difficult decisions at the budget. Decisions that they did not have the courage to take, which left us in the mess in the first place. When it comes to tax, she knows very well the limits of what I can say from this dispatch box, but we have an ironclad commitment to our fiscal rules. We can't just tax our way out of the problems that they left us, which is why we put in place tough. They were howling at the spending decisions. They wouldn't take them, and we'll stick to those spending decisions, and our focus is absolutely on growth. But their record, they flatlined the economy. They flatlined the economy, a mini-budget that crashed the economy, worst cost of living crisis in living history, and they left a £22 billion black hole, not taking lessons from them on the economy.
He knows very well the OBR found no such black hole. And he talks about a budget 3 years ago. The borrowing costs last week are at a 27-year high for 30-year gilts. The Chancellor is apparently promising to be ruthless in reducing spending. Let me suggest something that he should cut. There is no way that we should be giving up British territory in Chagos. Is rushing a deal which will be disastrous and which will land taxpayers with a multi-billion-pound bill. Why does the Prime Minister think British people should pay to surrender something that is already ours?
Mr. Speaker, we inherited a situation where the long-term operation of a vital military base was under threat because of legal challenges. The negotiations were started under the last government. The then Foreign Secretary came to this House to say why he was starting negotiations and what he wanted to achieve. And he said the aim was to, quote, ensure the continued effective operation of the base. That is precisely what this deal has delivered.
The Labour Chief Secretary of the Treasury, Liam Byrne, wrote that there was no money left. He was telling the truth. But in what has been dubbed the biggest lie in British politics, Rachel Reeves, the artful dodger of 11 Downing Street, takes us for fools in an effort to pick your pocket.
I've inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public budget means, Mr. Speaker, that we have inherited a projected overspend of £22 billion. A £22 billion hole in the public finances now. Not in the future, but now. £22 billion of spending this year that was covered up by the party opposite. If left unaddressed, it would mean a 25% increase in the budget deficit this year.
Now, I've read that report, as I'm sure others have, and nowhere in that report, nowhere, does it mention £22 billion. It's not there at all. In fact, the only reference they have to a number is to be found on page 2 and in table 1, and even the Treasury, straining every sinew, could only find numbers that added up to 9.5, and even there, the OBR says, and I quote, "It is not possible to judge how much of that might actually have been realised." So when the Chancellor said there is a £22 billion black hole, the OBR report yesterday now proves that was simply untrue. So will she come here and apologise for providing that number to the House when the OBR report now shows it's simply...
So, you've just seen the video. You've heard the speeches. You've watched the so-called justification for raising your taxes, cutting your services, and telling pensioners they'll have to tighten their belts for the good of the country. But let's not beat around the bush. What you've really witnessed is one of the most shameless political manipulations in modern British history. Let me ask you, how does it feel to be misled by the very people who claim to be cleaning up the mess? The £22 billion black hole wasn't just a number, it was a story. A narrative. A manufactured crisis designed to instill fear, submission, and compliance. Labour sold it hard. Keir Starmer repeated it like a mantra. Rachel Reeves used it as a political shield. But when you strip away the headlines and dig into the actual reports, the official documents from the Office for Budget Responsibility, the number simply doesn't exist. That's right. No £22 billion. No smoking gun. No economic apocalypse. Just a worst-case estimate of £9.5 billion, cautiously framed, and even then, based on incomplete data. Not a forecast. Not a certainty. And most importantly, not a justification for the economic pain Labour is now inflicting on millions of families. So, why did they lie? Or if you prefer the polite version, why did they inflate the crisis? Because fear works. Because when people believe the country is on the brink of financial collapse, they're more likely to accept harsh decisions. They're more likely to nod along when benefits are slashed, when fuel payments to pensioners vanish, and when taxes go up on working families who are already struggling to make ends meet. This is not just political spin. This is political engineering. It's the deliberate construction of a fictional crisis to create space for unpopular policies that otherwise would never pass the smell test. And here's the worst part, you paid for it. You're paying for it now in your payslip. In your energy bill. In the school that no longer has enough funding. In the hospital waiting list that keeps getting longer. All because Keir Starmer and his team needed a scapegoat, and found one in a phantom £22 billion shortfall that never existed. But let's step back. Let's look at the strategy behind this move. Labour knew they were about to make deeply unpopular decisions. They knew they would face backlash for targeting pensioners, small businesses, and middle-income families. So what did they do? They wrapped those decisions in a cloak of necessity. They framed themselves as the adults in the room, the ones forced to clean up the chaos left by the Conservatives. Sound familiar? It's the oldest trick in the political playbook. Create a villain, invent a crisis, and pose as the reluctant hero. But the numbers betray them. Chris Philp, a Conservative MP, read the same OBR report Starmer did. He found the truth. He exposed it in Parliament. He demanded an apology, not just to score points, but because the country deserves the truth. Let's be clear, this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a calculated narrative, repeated again and again, in speeches, interviews, and press releases. Labour knew what they were doing. And they knew it would work, because they counted on you not reading the fine print. And that, frankly, should make your blood boil. Because this isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about trust. It's about leadership. It's about whether the people who run this country are honest with you, or whether they'll twist reality just to justify whatever agenda they've already decided to pursue. Now ask yourself this: if they were willing to mislead the public about something as significant as a £22 billion black hole, what else are they hiding? Are more cuts coming? Will taxes rise again? Are we being prepared for yet another round of austerity dressed up as economic responsibility? This is where you come in. If you don't speak up, if you don't question, if you don't demand transparency, they will get away with it. And this isn't just a Labour issue. It's a democratic one. Politicians of all stripes need to know that the public is watching, that we're not going to swallow every line fed to us in a soundbite or a press conference. We read the reports. We checked the facts. We know the difference between truth and spin. So what happens now? Now, the pressure has to build. Now, every MP who repeated that £22 billion claim needs to be held accountable. Now, every journalist, every analyst, every voter needs to ask, what's really going on here? Keir Starmer wanted you to believe he was the adult in the room. The responsible one. The serious politician making the tough choices. But responsibility starts with honesty. And if he can't even be honest about the numbers, what kind of leadership is that? If you're fed up with being treated like a fool, if you want leaders who tell it like it is, then it's time to demand better. And if you think this video exposed something important, don't keep it to yourself. Talk about it. Share it. Challenge your friends, your colleagues, your MP. Ask them where the £22 billion went. Ask them why your services are being cut when the crisis may not even be real. Ask them who benefits from all this confusion and chaos. Because the truth is powerful, but only if people hear it. Let's make sure they do.